Good morning, everyone. I'm William Brangham at the PBS NewsHour, and thank you for joining us for this live stream. We're talking about the breaking news that we have just been hearing overnight, that President Trump and the First Lady have both become infected with the coronavirus. This is obviously terrible news for the country. Having the president in a potentially very dangerous state infected with this virus is something that nobody wants to see. I'm joined by our beloved White House correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor, who has been covering all of this. We'd like to hear your questions. We'll try to answer as many of those as we possibly can in the course of this, but we will try to get through initially the things that we know, the things that we don't know, and the things that we are watching as we go forward. So as I mentioned, Yamiche, we got this news late last night that the president and the first lady had both tested positive for the virus. What else do we know? How is he feeling? Where are they? What's happening?
Well, this is really a stunning day, and it was a stunning night for the president of the United States to test positive for the coronavirus. It's a virus that he's downplayed. It's a virus that he said that he's protected America from, and it's a virus that now is impacting not only him, but the First Lady, as well as the entire White House, because now there are a lot of people who are very scared about how many people might have this. We might remember, Hope Hicks, a close aide to the president, was the first person to test positive last night, but there were cases in the White House even before this. And White House officials at this point are saying that the president has mild symptoms. There's some reporting out there that he appears lethargic and has appeared lethargic at different events that we at the NewsHour are trying to confirm. But we know that he is not asymptomatic, which is a big deal in this fact. This means that the president is experiencing some symptoms from this virus. We're told that Hope Hicks, the close aide again, that she was someone who was feeling sick enough that when she was flying back from the president's rally in Minnesota this week, she was quarantined in the back of Air Force One. But it sounds as though the president possibly isn't feeling as bad as possibly Hope Hicks was feeling, but he is, like I said, experiencing symptoms. There are so many unanswered questions in this, including how did the president get infected? How many other people are going to test positive? The vice president's the wife has also tested negative, but there are just so many people who work in the White House and so many people who work closely with the president that this is scaring a lot of people, frankly.
We should reiterate the fact, and I know this is on a lot of people's minds, that the president of the United States is still the president. Donald Trump is still president. He has not stepped away from his office. He is, my understanding, Yamiche, is that he is basically isolating in the White House residence, but will continue, I guess, at a distance, continuing the work of the president, taking meetings, phone calls. Is that right? Is that your understanding, that business is normal?
That's my understanding. White House officials say that the president is working from the White House residence and that he is, quote, it's business as usual, is the way one White House source put it. Of course, it is not business as usual in terms of the fact that he has had to quarantine in the residence. Another thing to note is that the president is supposed to be holding a call today with to talk about seniors and supporting them in the coronavirus. He had been scheduled to go to Florida, and the president has had to clear his entire schedule except for that one event that we know of at this time. Another thing to note is that the White House doctor, when he put out the news that he confirmed that the president had this virus, he said that he did not expect any disruptions. But that, again, is something that we have to really take with a grain of salt, because there are already disruptions. There are already the idea that the president is not going to be able to go on the campaign trail in the way that he had planned to do so. The president had been campaigning vigorously with these big rallies, sometimes where people were not wearing masks, were not social distancing outdoors, sometimes indoors. So the president's day, while it is continuing, and he is, of course, continuing to have the role of the presidency, he hasn't stepped back from any activities of the presidency, his day has changed. Things are not the same. Things are not business as usual.
Of course, this is obviously, as you're saying, going to have a big impact on the campaign. A lot of questions about what happens with the next round of debates. I think it's important that we remind our audience that when someone is infected with the coronavirus, this is true in the United States and globally, that roughly 90% of people do get better. And that's an important thing to keep in mind for people as they're listening to this and worried about what this means for our country and both for the First Lady and the president himself. But we do know that there are also risk factors that put people at greater risk of having worse complications. Yamiche, you had mentioned that he is having symptoms, but we know the president is 74 years old. The president is not a slim man. We know that being overweight, I'm not sure if the technical term that he is technically obese. I believe so. I've heard conflicting evidence about that. That puts you at higher risk for this. And so we just have to be watching at this point. Right now, the indication of mild symptoms could be that's the extent of it. I know personally many people who've been infected with the virus and all they ever had was mild symptoms. Of course, if those mild symptoms progressed into something more serious, that would be cause for concern and cause for alarm. But again, I think it's important to remind people that for right now, mild symptoms means he's still the president. There's no reason to change that. One other thing I would like to touch on, too, is this question of what kind of treatment the president might be getting. And for now, all the best evidence is that if you are just experiencing mild symptoms, there really are no treatments that are going to help you. They'll monitor him. They'll check for temperature. They'll maintain a look at what's called his pulse oxygen. That's sometimes a little thing you see clipped on someone's finger with the glowing light. That just measures how much oxygen is circulating through your blood, because that is often a sign that the virus is spreading in your lungs and it harming their ability to help you breathe, basically. But right now, that's all that the president should be getting. Have we heard anything, Yamiche, more from the White House doctor about any potential course of action beyond the stuff I'm talking about?
As of now, we haven't. The letter yesterday made clear that the White House doctor will be continuing to monitor President Trump and the First Lady. But as you pointed out, he is 74. He is a senior. He is someone who evidence shows is overweight. And as a result, he is in that population of people that we've been talking about for months that are at higher risk for complications and more serious impacts from the virus. There's no evidence that he is seeing or experiencing any conflicts or any particular serious symptoms as of right now. But I want to reiterate that we're talking about a senior citizen and someone who falls in the group of people that Dr. Fauci and so many other health officials have said have to be extra vigilant when it comes to this virus. Another thing to note is that he is an American who is one of the most protected, if not the most protected American in the country. And as a result, it really underscores that anyone can get this virus. If the president of the United States, who people around him are tested daily, who is constantly surrounded by people, medical officials to take care of him, if he can get this virus and then have to deal with the symptoms and have to quarantine, it just underscores how much this is really getting into American society. So I think the president, of course, has been making the case that this is a virus that has been downplaying at times, has been talking about the virus in a way saying that it's going to be in the rearview mirror. Just this week, he was making fun of Joe Biden for wearing a mask, but it underscores what the health officials have told us, which is that it's very important to wear masks. It's very important to social distance. And now we're seeing an outbreak literally in the headquarters of the United States. It's remarkable, William.
It is. And I think I've seen some people, some highly respected public health officials who I know personally, and I've been talking with quite a bit, who argue that this is a real failure on the part of the White House and the people around him to protect the president, because this is not just a man at a motorcycle rally in South Dakota who might be concerned about how he interacts. His health impacts all of us, and it impacts the reason we're talking about this, the reason this has impacts on the election and the courts and all of the functionings of our government is that we need the man we elect to be president to remain healthy. For everyone who is following along, we're going to try to get to some of your questions. Put them in the comments. Tweet them at us, hashtag AskNewsHour. We will try to get to those as quickly as we can. The first question I'm going to go to here, this is from Bryant Mitchell on YouTube. What's the plan for future debates now? Yamiche, do you have any knowledge about that? We have a vice presidential debate coming up and then another presidential debate after that. Has there been any notification about what this does vis-a-vis those?
Well, I should tell you, and I apologize to the audience now, I'm constantly looking at my phone because that's one of the big questions. How is this going to impact the campaign, but also and specifically, how is this going to impact the debates? The vice president has tested negative, but as you know, and as people who have been studying this virus know, testing negative one day doesn't mean that the virus might not still be circulating in your system, and it might come up in a test in other days. So I think it's going to be a big question of whether or not Vice President Pence is going to travel to go to a debate and whether or not Senator Harris, the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side, whether she's going to be wanting to stand at a podium in the same room as Vice President Pence for 90 minutes. I should tell you, I've been talking to sources at the Biden campaign who say they got no heads up that the president had tested positive for the coronavirus. They learned about all of this, all of the exposure, all of the possible exposure that their campaign might have had through media reports. So there is a lot of real anxiety in the Biden campaign about what exposure they might have in dealing with negotiations for the debate, in dealing with senior staff talking. We saw during the debate that President Trump and Joe Biden were on opposite sides of the stage and were not near each other. But now Joe Biden is being tested and we're awaiting those results. William, if you see the results while we're sitting here, let me know. But I have not seen the results of that test. So now we're waiting with anxiety for that. So it really throws into question the vice presidential debate. And then, of course, the president. How is he going to travel to a debate and to multiple debates when he's supposed to be quarantining for some 14 days at least, if he's not sick and experiencing mild symptoms longer than that? So I think it really questions whether or not the president is going to be able to debate while having the coronavirus. Also, is he going to be able to debate in person, or are we going to turn to Zoom debates? We all saw the raucous debate. I can't imagine how you have a conversation like the one that Joe Biden and President Trump had over a virtual platform, but that might be what needs to happen.
Right. I know that there was a lot of talk after that debate, and Chris Wallace and a lot of people suggesting that there should be a way to mute someone's microphone. Any of us who have been living our professional lives on Zoom know that muting people's mics and unmuting their mics is a complicated process and would certainly make for a very peculiar 2020 style debate. Let's go back to some more questions here. Snow P. Harper on Instagram is asking, are people he's been in close contact with, I'm assuming that's the president, like Amy Coney Barrett, getting tested? What do we know about who else in the orbit of the president and of Hope Hicks are getting tested now?
There are a number of White House officials who are getting tested. The White House says they're doing contact tracing. The big headline when it comes to the Supreme Court is that Judge Amy Coney Barrett has tested negative for the virus. That doesn't mean, again, as we've said and we need to reiterate, it doesn't mean that she can't test positive later on. But right now, the White House is saying the last time she was with the president was on Saturday and that she is now testing negative. I should tell you, I was at that White House event when the president announced Amy Coney Barrett as his nominee for the Supreme Court. There was very little mask wearing, very little social distancing. One of the only people, or one of the few people, I should say, that was wearing a mask was Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. He had a mask on, but there were a number of cabinet officials, some of them in senior citizen age, who were not wearing masks. And that goes in line with what White House events have been like over the last few weeks and months. There has been a lot of large crowds, a lot of people who are not social distancing, a lot of people who are not wearing masks. That has been the protocol. The president has mocked Joe Biden and others for wearing masks. The mask, of course, the issue has been a political one where the White House doesn't want to be seen as being too overly cautious. They say they don't want to cause panic. Health officials say that they're mirroring bad behavior. Whichever side you fall on that, what we know is that health officials are saying they should have been wearing masks. But right now, it seems as though the judge is okay. Another thing I want to quickly note, she was in meetings over the last few days and weeks.
This is Judge Barrett.
Yes, Judge Barrett was in meetings with lawmakers on Capitol Hill. So there's also a lot of question of whether or not this virus might be circulating on Capitol Hill now. We heard that Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, she's going to be getting tested. But there are a lot of GOP lawmakers who met with Judge Barrett who also now will likely be getting tested because they might be worried that they somehow got the virus either from some White House aides who were around the president and then around Judge Barrett and GOP officials.
I think to your point, Yamiche, that you're mentioning that on the one hand, the president and his family and members of the campaign have been, I think it's accurate to say, unwilling to wear masks as often as public health officials argue. At the same time, the White House Coronavirus Task Force guidelines could not be more crystal clear on this issue, that wear a mask, keep your social distance, don't congregate with people in crowded, closed spaces where the ventilation is lousy and where the virus, like a cloud of smoke, can build up and potentially infect people. And this contrast that we have been seeing throughout this pandemic, where the public health officials who meet with the president and the vice president and talk with them on a regular basis are arguing one thing, and then the president and his family and his campaign and many of his surrogates model oftentimes the exact opposite behavior is many people I've heard of just referring to this as it's irresponsible. And on some level, this is the kind of thing that we would have hoped could have been different, because the president, this is a preventable virus. We know how to stop the transmission of the virus from one of us to another one of us. And it's sad to say that process broke down in this case. We want to get back to some more of your questions here. I should say we've been getting a lot of questions of people questioning how true all of this is. Is the president really telling us the truth about this? Do we know he is in fact positive? Is this a distraction? I don't want to truck in too many conspiracy theories, but Jeffrey Says on Instagram asks what a lot of people have been asking, which is, what about the possibility of Trump and the White House lying about the positive test? Yamiche, there's no evidence of that, correct?
There is no evidence that that is the case, that they are making this up and lying about the president's COVID-19 positive test. But we have to acknowledge that the president has, at best, a complicated relationship with the truth. At worst, the president is seen as someone who lies and is spreading misinformation almost every day, almost in every single interaction with the media or any single public speech that he gives. So the president is someone who does not have a lot of credibility with a large swath of Americans who think that he has lied several times about the virus, has lied several times about all sorts of other things. So it goes to show that the consequence to that is that there are people who are questioning whether or not the president could be lying about this virus. So we have the White House doctor saying that the president tested positive. We have President Trump saying he tested positive. White House aides saying he tested positive. That's what we're going on. That's the evidence that we have right now. The White House doctor has at times gotten backlash for claiming that the president was one of the most healthiest people in the country, and not really being that transparent about the president's actual well-being. There are some people who are critics of the president who say we don't really know how healthy the president is, but the president pushed back on that, and he says he is very healthy. He says he's up for it. He does often have hour to hour and a half long speeches on the campaign trail. He says that shows his stamina, shows that he's up for the job. He does also work very long hours. There are times where the president's tweeting at 6 a.m. and then tweeting again at midnight. But so that's the evidence that we're going off of. The president saying that he should be believed when it comes to this virus and being positive. And there are, of course, people who just simply don't think that he tells the truth on a number of other issues and might not be telling the truth this time around.
This is one of the saddest parts of this whole pandemic, is the absolute tidal wave of misinformation that is flowing through social media and on different broadcast networks that is only complicated what is already a hard thing. I mean, I don't think there's anyone that would say, oh, a pandemic of this kind would have been easy for any government to respond to. We have seen more effective public health responses in other nations in the world that have really kept the caseloads down, the death rates down. But even those countries that did what are, a grade A job dealing with this virus have struggled with all of this. I should say the First Lady, Melania Trump, has tweeted while we've been talking, Yamiche. She says, quote, "Thank you for the love you are sending our way. I have mild symptoms, but overall feeling good. I'm looking forward to a speedy recovery." That's from the First Lady, Melania Trump. We hope that is, in fact, the case. Back to the viewers' questions. Mercedes on Instagram is asking, who will stop him, the president, if he tries to hold an event? I guess this is the ongoing question of, I don't know legally who really has the ability to say to the president of the United States, if he says, I want to go to an event in Wisconsin, I want to hold a rally, there is no measure or mechanism, is there, for someone to stop the president from doing what the president wants to do? I mean, absent breaking the law, right?
Well, that I think is another big question and another big unknown. If the president decides, even though I have the coronavirus, I want to go out and campaign, I don't want to be slowed down. We're something like 34 or 33 days away from the election day. The president understands this is a critical time in the campaign, and he's made being on the campaign trail, not social distancing, not wearing a mask, a central part of his thesis, which is that the coronavirus is going away. Of course, again, there is no evidence of that, but the president has made that a central part of his argument for why he should be reelected. He says, I handled this virus so well that we are doing better than other countries. Again, that's not true for sure. But it's going to be hard to understand if the president says he wants to go somewhere. Who would tell him that he can't do that? He is the president of the United States. He's the commander in chief. He doesn't report to anyone other than the American people when we elect him. But other than that, it would be really hard to figure out and to see a scenario where the president is stopped by someone from traveling if he is dead set on doing that.
Yeah, that's certainly going to be interesting to see how this changes the president's behavior going forward. The guidelines are that if you test positive for the virus, you are supposed to stay away from others for 14 days. If you don't have any symptoms, I believe the guidance is that you stay isolated, and that means really no interaction physically with anyone else for at least 10 days. Again, just as you say, we know that this is the president's lifeblood on a campaign, is to be out there, to be in front of crowds, and to try to stir up his passion amongst his supporters to keep them turning out and getting interest. So it'd be very interesting to see how this goes forward. We've also been getting a good deal of questions about worst case scenarios as to what might happen if the president were to become incapacitated, if the president, God forbid, were to pass away. And I am not an elections law expert, and I would recommend that everyone take a look at Rick Hasson. He's a constitutional law professor and an elections law scholar out in California. He runs the Election Law blog. He posted a very interesting excerpts from a back and forth that occurred by two NYU professors recently, Rick Pildes, who's a constitutional law professor, and Joshua Tucker. And they were posing these questions about what happens if the party's nominee dies or withdraws after having been officially nominated, but before the November election. Obviously, the concern is that the ballots have already gone out. I received my ballots here in Washington, D.C. They clearly state Donald Trump and Mike Pence and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the choices. If I fill those out and send them in, what happens if I've cast a vote for someone who is now either not able to become president or can't assume the office because of incapacitation? There are all sorts of complicated rules about this. I'm going to read a tiny bit here from Rick Pildes, who's the constitutional law scholar. Here's the question he was asked, and I'm going to just give a quick bit of information with this. What happens if the party's nominee dies or withdraws after having been officially nominated, but before the November election? Pildes says that, in essence, that this puts the ball in the hands of the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee. And the DNC has apparently very clear rules about this, that the 447 members of the DNC, they would then, and along with their chair, Tom Perez, have to choose who their new nominee is. Now, my understanding would be, why wouldn't they simply choose the vice presidential nominee, Senator Kamala Harris? I don't know. And in the conversation that we'll try to post a link to on our website, which is really interesting and it gets into the nuances of this, it would seem to make sense that both Mike Pence and Kamala Harris would automatically elevate into the first position in those cases, but it's not necessarily true. I don't know that. So lots of questions about that. I wish we had more answers on that. Well, something we'll continue to cover as we follow this case. Yamiche, I wonder if we could go back to something, because you have an experience that so few of us in the country have. And it gets to this very nature of, how do we get to the fact that the president of the United States became infected? You go to the White House all the time. You go into the press briefing rooms. I know you've been elsewhere within the White House itself. Can you just give us a sense of, what is the sense of precaution there? Do they treat it as seriously as we would hope?
Well, it depends on how seriously people hope that they take it. So I think I'm someone who, when I'm going into the White House, thinking about PBS NewsHour and my colleagues and my family, I don't want to put anyone that I'm close to at risk. So I make sure to wear a mask. I make sure to be wiping down surfaces. I make sure to have hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes and wipe everything that I touch down. The White House, you see a lot of officials who are not wearing masks. When we go into the briefings, I wipe down every seat in the White House Correspondents Association. All of the correspondents, we all wear masks during the briefing. The vice president, the White House press secretary, rather, she has not been wearing masks during her briefings. She says that it's because she's farther enough away from reporters that she doesn't have to wear a mask. But also when you walk back, there's a small press area behind the briefing. So the most famous room in the briefing and in the White House is that big briefing room. It's actually not that big, but that briefing room where you see reporters posing questions to the White House press secretary or the president. But behind that, there is a press area and where about maybe, I would say, 6 to 7 people sit. And then you can actually go up a little bit to an incline where there's another group of people sitting in the press area. I've not seen people in those areas wearing masks. There are people who would think that they should be wearing masks. They're indoors. They're in close quarters with each other. But the White House says that a lot of those people are getting tested very regularly. And as a result, they feel comfortable with those people not wearing masks. I should say there are a lot of people who are also working from home a lot of times from the White House because this pandemic has been upending people's work lives. There are some people who are not coming into the White House, so it's not as crowded as it sometimes is in normal times. That being said, the thing that needs to be understood here is that there have been a number of White House events where people have been standing shoulder to shoulder without masks. The Republican National Convention was one of those instances. People were not tested going into that event. There were thousands of people, or at least 1,500 people on the White House lawn. It was transformed into a sort of campaign rally. That's just one example of the White House having events and not having people social distance. I was there on Saturday when they rolled out Amy Coney Barrett as their nominee for the Supreme Court. Again, we were standing as reporters in a pen, not as socially distanced as we probably could have been, but we were all wearing masks. The people in front of me, which is cabinet members, all sorts of people who were standing between me and the president and the nominee, they were not wearing masks and they were sitting shoulder to shoulder. So there were some people who were wearing masks, but very few people in this White House have been wearing masks. So that health officials and critics of this White House say puts them at a risk that they don't need to be at. That this is the behavior that they're doing. That this isn't the behavior that you should be doing in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I can't reiterate this point that you're making enough, Yamiche, that we know with asymptomatic transmission, you could be sitting next to someone in a closed room. They seem perfectly healthy. They say, oh, I got tested a week or so ago, or I got tested on Wednesday. That person could absolutely still be infected. And we know people are most contagious oftentimes before they even show symptoms. And so the idea that people are gathering close together in crowded spaces with not a lot of ventilation and with no masks really goes against every single thing that we have learned about how we ought to be operating in this pandemic. And again, it's one thing if people take these risks on themselves and they go into a restaurant in their hometown and they crowd together. It's problematic. You put the staff at risk. You put the people who work there at risk. You put the people in your life at risk. But when we're talking about the cabinet officials and the White House and the president and the vice president of the United States, I just think that there is a responsibility that has to be stepped up. And this is certainly something we're going to be hearing a great deal more about.
If I could jump in when you're talking about this, thinking about risks, the reporting as of now is that Hope Hicks tested positive Wednesday night. On Thursday, the president was out and traveling. So there are a lot of people who wonder, should the president have been out and traveling? Did he put people at risk by being out and being at different events and being kind of doing business as usual when he knew that a top aide had tested positive? That's another big question. Who infected Hope Hicks? Who infected the president? who could have been at risk not only at the White House, but in all the different events that the president went to between those timelines that we're seeing now. And when did this timeline start? Hope Hicks might not be patient zero at the White House. Earlier this month, we got very little information, but we were told that someone tested positive at the White House. We don't know who that person is. We don't know what their symptoms were. We don't know who was around them. So we're talking about this now and today because obviously the president just tested positive, but this could have been circulated in the White House for longer than the 2 or 3 or even 4 days that we're talking about. It could be weeks.
Certainly a momentous day, and we certainly hope everything goes well and this is not spreading as widely as many people might have feared. Yamiche, thank you so much for doing this. I know this is an enormously busy day for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your viewers' questions down there, but we will keep tracking this news about the president and the first lady and one of his senior advisors have all tested positive for the coronavirus. The latest news we have seen is that the president is isolated in the White House residence. He is still fulfilling all the duties of the presidency. He's being watched by his doctors, and we hope that this does not progress any further than this. But thank you all for joining us. Tune into the NewsHour tonight. We'll certainly have more on this. We'll be talking about all of the downstream consequences for this. On behalf of the NewsHour and Yamiche, thank you again. I'm William Brangham. Thanks very, very much for joining us.